Totally. Come up, come up. You're landing on something. Go up, go up, go up, go up. Don't back up. You don't know what's behind you. You have to come up. You have to come up.
The enormous piece of hull lying far from the Bismarck is a mystery. Later, it will prove to be the key to unraveling the secrets of the wreck.
We landed right on the son of a bitch. What it was. Yeah. That's about as exciting as I wanted to get. You just see us landing right on something that like hooks it, you know. Good work. You got us out. You flew out of it.
They begin their damage at the bow.
Okay, I see something.
They identify historically important shellhead. As the hood was sinking, the Prince of Wales was wounded and under heavy bombardment. Fighting back desperately, its gun crew scored a critical hit on Bismarck. The shell blasted right through the bow from port to starboard, leaving an exit hole 6 feet across.
That's a big Audi. That's the exit one right there.
Damage reports came to the bridge. Prince of Wales had scored 2 hits from 14,000 yards. The shot through the bow was above the waterline, but thousands of tons of water were pouring in because of the storm swell. The other end below the side armor, flooding a boiler room and causing a 9-degree list to port. The damage forced Lindemann to back off from his top speed, by just a few knots, but enough to ultimately seal Bismarck's fate.
Rear brake 24-volt on position.
Jim prepares the pilot elbow deepens the wreck.
ROV power. You get a fantastic perspective on these wrecks that you don't get flying around in a sub. You really are like a person, you know, like it would have looked to somebody walking the decks at that time.
The hole near Carl's office looked as if it might be just big enough inside. It's a risky maneuver.
We're going to try to go in this hole, okay? But it's even not rated, I have no idea. For better or worse, we're going in. Not even sure I can fit in here. Okay, we fit.
Yep, you got it.
Well, we're officially inside the ship. Look at the damage. Kabang. Now, if we turn to my right, there should be a door. Okay, there's our door.
Interesting, the growth around that door.
Yeah,
Now we're getting into something.
I think we're going into Carl's office. Carl's office. This is where he worked. This is right next to the adjutant's office. This is Carl's duty station. Check it out. You see the chair? You have to tell us if it looks like two tables. Table and a chair.
Pretty avalanche in some rally.
Mm-hmm.
Case showing there.
This looks like here. Long table.
Yeah, it's a long t-shirt.
Mhm.
3 people sat there, one here, down here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Där gick hela rum och det satt nochmal einer da.
on the long table at the far right end, a third
So.
person.
Und dann saß da nochmal einer.
We looked for your typewriter, but we couldn't find it.
Det var en enorm va?
Yeah, that was
Enorm.
Right where you were.
Yeah.
One startling feature of the wreck is the missing stern. The last 50 feet of the ship are simply gone. Though the core of the ship was armored, the stern was not. This way as if chopped by a guillotine.
We're looking at the aft bulkhead, armored bulkhead, the whole stern sheared off. If the ship was intact, we'd be sitting inside the ship right now. There's the afterdeck up there.
What's interesting is how all this teak decking failed. It must have been extremely violent. It couldn't have ripped upward. It must have snapped them over that edge, which would be consistent with having inverted, then a buoyant failure where it broke off that direction.
That's the swastika. That's right where Hitler walked when he inspected the ship. We're sitting on the swastika right now. This is creeping me out. Okay, there's the propeller. The starboard propeller.
Beneath the severed stern, the dive team searches for evidence of the famous attack by swordfish torpedo bombers. Slowed by the earlier hits from the Prince of Wales, Bismarck was just barely in range of the rickety biplanes. One of their torpedoes about her doom. But no one has ever actually seen the damage.
Here's the rudder. Looks like the rudder got stuffed into the propeller. All right, that's the center screw, and that's the rudder. Look, and they're stuffed into each other. And the center screw is all wanged up, which would, pretty strongly indicate it was turning when it happened. What is that? Is that a hole? That is for sure a hole. All right, so there's a big stinking hole right above the rudder. Okay, so that's our torpedo hole for sure. Yeah, let's get up in there. Mike will kill me for this, but yeah, we're well inside the steering gear room now. We're looking right at the aft bulkhead right now.
They have found the hole made by a single torpedo, which changed history.
They know how desperate this mission is. We have to remember that many of these men have never flown a swordfish before, and if they have, they certainly never flew it in combat. In the oncoming darkness, and with the bad weather, it takes them almost 2 hours to find Bismarck. When they do, they swarm around her, attacking from port, attacking from starboard, but without any regard to their own safety. They're up against a ship that put up a withering curtain of anti-aircraft fire. And they're flying old and slow aircraft, but they are desperate to hit her. And time after time, they bear in just over the sea, pulling up just above her decks, driving into the anti-aircraft fire, trying to hide in the clouds, doing everything they can to try to bring their torpedoes to bear on the side. It's a courageous attack, one of the most courageous charges of the war.
They launch torpedo after torpedo, but Bismarck evades them all, except one. Incredibly, a single torpedo killed 1,000 on the starboard rudder. His heel has been found. Desperately, the crew attempts to make repairs, but the storm seas swell in through the torpedo hole, driving them back. They never even knew the full extent of the damage.
Okay, we're looking right down out of the hole. So if I just drop down, I come right out.
Given what we now know, despite all their best efforts, there was nothing that the Bismarck's crew could have done to clear the rudder.
Lutyens fired off a terse radio message to Naval Command. Ship unable to maneuver, we will fight to the last shell. Long live the Fuhrer. The suddenness and finality of the signal stunned the fleet staff and the radio man on board. Word spread among the crew. Hope turned to despair. In the early morning hours, Captain Lindemann announced that they could help themselves to anything they wanted from the ship's stores. His words were like a death sentence. As the hours ticked away until dawn, men prepared themselves for their final battle.
Is this damage right here?
Meticulous notes are taken, recording the damage so that the battle can be forensically reconstructed.
Shell damage on its port side.
They find hundreds of shell splashes, telltale marks where incoming rounds exploded against the armor, but failed to penetrate. The splashes tell the story of the massive barrage which rained down on Bismarck during its final battle. The British Armada moves in for the kill.
Tubby opens a fire at about 27,000 yards, and he constantly closes the distance to her until finally they're down to 3,000 yards, firing almost 11 shots that penetrate the Bismarck through the turret, through the superstructure.
No question that they wanted to get the Germans back for what they had under the hood. Tubby himself ordered the captain of the King George that battleship as close as he could to the Bismarck so that he could look through his glasses and see big chunks of that ship being shot off. They had her. They wanted to.
The Rodney is firing 16-inch shells at Bismarck.
Blow by blow.
The King George is firing 14-inch shells.
Hammer blow by hammer blow.
And the three cruisers are pounding her with 8-inch shells.
Put her under.
The prime target for the British gun crews was the bridge. If they could take out the brain of the ship, they could render it helpless. The 4-story Admiral's Bridge was swept away in the sinking. But Lutyens and Lindemann commanded the battle from the Captain's Bridge, which still remains. Just after the Captain's Bridge is an armored conning tower, from which the ship's main guns were directed. It's an armored vault with walls 14 inches thick. Approaching from the starboard side, the subcrew is surprised to find the bridge and conning tower almost intact.
This thing sure got scarred up, but it doesn't look like it got blown open. Looks like they didn't crack that clamshell. That's a hell of a door. That is a good door.
But as they come around to port, that illusion is shattered. The big guns of the British Armada have riddled the bridge and ripped it apart.
Okay, it's working. Good. Doors down. Let's see if we can get a look inside. This is the forward artillery director. Well, it was the battle nerve center of the ship.
Chief Gunnery Officer Schneider directed all 4 of Bismarck's main turrets from inside the conning tower. At 9:02, one of Rodney's 16-inch shells scored a direct hit on the tower. The shell ripped across the deck and exploded against the armored tower, blowing off the 14-inch thick door. The concussion killed Schneider and the others inside, ending the coordinated command of Bismarck's guns.
Imagine it rocked the Casbah when those shells hit it. God bless. Look at these blast holes. And this is where that shell came in and blew right through the bridge.
Firing from starboard at point-blank range, Rodney made the kill shot. A shell right through the captain's bridge.
Boom. God, it just ripped it open, didn't it? Look, it just ripped through there, just peeled it back like some kind of cheese product. This should take us right into the bridge, if there's anything left to go into. So this big shell hole should be right here.
Rodney's shell would have instantly killed Lutyens and Lindemann.
But at least we're seeing paint.
Yeah.
For a change. Somebody's office. See the desk? See the 2 desks?
Looks like mattress springs.
Yeah, this must have been somebody's bunk.
So tell me.
That humanity has known. A deadly war that involved tens of millions of fighters around the world. Let's retrace on a map a summary of the main events of World War II. At the end of World War I, Germany and its allies are defeated and held solely responsible for the war. With heavy sanctions imposed upon them, the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires are dismantled, while Germany has to repay what many consider an unreasonable debt. Its colonies and some of its territories are ceded to the victors and to Poland, which is recreated. These sanctions are seen as humiliation by the German people. The German economy is weakened by excessive debt and suffers hyperinflation. National mints try to address this by printing banknotes, causing a devaluation of its currency. Between 1914 and November 1923, the value of the mark grew by 1,000 billion. The following year, radical measures are taken to halt inflation and stabilize and revive the economy. But in 1929, the Wall Street crash in New York causes the worst economic crisis of the 20th century. Its impact is felt worldwide, with Germany not spared either, causing the unemployment rate to explode. Severely weakened, Germany sees the rise of nationalism in 1933 that allows the rise to power of the Nazi Party with Adolf Hitler at its helm. Despite the strict conditions imposed upon Germany after World War I, the new totalitarian regime resets the country and restores military service. The country also begins an aggressive foreign policy with the dream of uniting all German-speaking people. Italy, despite its victory with the Allies, is frustrated by the amount of territory it gained after World War I. Since 1922, the country is ruled by the dictatorial fascist party of Benito Mussolini. Italy begins a colonial policy by seizing Ethiopia and prepares a future invasion in Albania. In Spain begins 3 years of civil war opposing the Republican government supported by the USSR and the International Brigades and the nationalist camp led by Francisco Franco and aided by Italy and Germany. The two countries took the opportunity to test their armies and to get closer diplomatically. In Asia, Japan continues its expansionist policy. The country takes advantage of the civil war in China to invade new territories. The Japanese army uses chemical and biological weapons and commits massacres of populations. Germany is now powerful enough to launch its territorial expansion. It first annexed Austria with support from the local Nazi party. Next, the west of Czechoslovakia was invaded. The Slovak Republic becomes a German satellite state, while Hungary grows closer diplomatically. After the occupation of a part of Lithuania, Germany signs with the USSR a non-aggression pact and a plan to carve up Europe. It then attacks Poland, which provokes the United Kingdom and France to declare war, marking the beginning of World War II. Although the German forces are concentrated in the east, the Allied troops do not take initiative in the west. Instead, France and the United Kingdom try to cut the strategic iron ore route that passes through Norway and supplies the German military industry. Germany reacts by invading Denmark and Norway. Within days, the country captures Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Belgium. Hitler's new military strategy is called Blitzkrieg, which surprises opposition defenses with rapid, high-intensity attacks in a concentrated area. British forces retreat in the face of this German military prowess, and the German army bears down on Paris. The French army is defeated and an armistice is signed. Germany occupies the north and west of France, leaving its other territory and colonies under the control of the new government. Germany thus has indirect control of French colonies without having to send an army there. However, parts of the French colonies and the Belgian Congo chooses to stay in the camp of the Allies. In London, which already hosts several governments in exile, General Charles de Gaulle creates Free France, which continues to fight Nazi Germany. Brazzaville is named as its capital. Pursuant to the agreement signed with Germany, the Soviet Union seizes the Baltic states and a part of Romania. Germany, Italy, and Japan combine to form the Axis powers. All dominions and British colonies, with the exception of Ireland, enter the war. In Africa, fighting begins between Italian colonies and Allied forces. While in Europe, despite the massive aerial bombing of British cities, Germany fails to take over the country. Hitler then changes his plans. He now wants to invade the USSR. But the plan is delayed by Italy, that fails to invade Greece and is forced to retreat by Allied forces. After the accession of Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria to the Axis forces, the German armies head south to invade Yugoslavia and Greece. Everywhere in Europe, the resistance is organized in different forms. Sometimes people organize strikes, demonstrations, or protect wanted persons. Some groups spy for the Allies, conduct sabotage, or print resistance newspapers. In Eastern Europe, guerrilla forces undermine the Axis armies. In Yugoslavia and Greece, resistant communists and royalist groups confront each other. Germany isn't spared the anti-Nazi resistance, with some attempts to assassinate Hitler, which fail. On June 22, Axis forces launched on some accounts the largest military operation in history to attack USSR, which now passes de facto into the camp of Allied forces. The bulk of the German troops, well equipped and motorized, rush to the east. To support the Soviets, Allies occupy Iran, which then opens a supply route through the Caucasus. German armies arrive in Leningrad and begin a siege of the city that would last 872 days and cause more than 1 million civilian deaths. Further south, German troops were stopped at the gates of Moscow, where they suffer a harsh and deadly winter. Behind the front lines, the SS massacre Slavic and Jewish populations. In Asia, Japan occupies French Indochina. To counter its expansionist policy, the United States imposes upon it an embargo on oil and steel. In response, the Japanese conduct a surprise attack on the United States at Pearl Harbor. A massive aerial bombing damages a large part of the US naval fleet. The United States enters the war on the Allied side. At first, they concentrate their forces on the Pacific front. The country also provides supplies to the USSR, which continues resisting the German advance. Japan, for its part, conquers new territories in the Pacific. In addition to the massacres, Japan sends 10 million Chinese civilians into forced labor camps. In Indonesia, millions of prisoners suffer the same fate on the island of Java. In Burma and Thailand, Allied prisoners are exhausted in the construction of a railway line. Moreover, hundreds of thousands of women are forcibly recruited into prostitution for the Japanese army. In Europe, concentration and extermination camps are built to massacre, among others, Jews, resistance fighters, political opponents, gypsies, homosexuals, and people with disabilities. Fearing a second front in Europe, Hitler built the Atlantic Wall, a series of military installations protecting the coast from invasion. But the Allies first landed in Morocco and Algeria. Italian Libya finds itself caught between the two fronts. Having lost control of its colonies, Vichy France is invaded. In the east, Axis forces try to cut the supply route of the Caucasus, but for the first time, the German offensive undergoes a major military setback. The Soviets take the initiative and counterattack. Africa is now entirely controlled by Allies who organize a landing in Sicily. The new Italian government requests an armistice, causing the Germans to invade. The USSR advances rapidly westward, forcing the German army to concentrate on that front. On June 6, 1944, the Allies land in Normandy. Their armies quickly take over and liberate Paris. In the west, as in the east, countries are liberated or switch camps. With victory in sight, Allied powers announced the creation of the United Nations. Countries that declared war on Germany and Japan would be admitted at its founding conference. This triggers a wave of declarations of war, but without major consequence. On April 30, Hitler commits suicide in his bunker just before the arrival of the Soviets. 8 days later, the country surrenders. The United States and USSR join forces to overcome the empire of Japan. The Soviets begin a military invasion via Manchuria, while the US drops 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On August 15, Japan surrenders, marking the end of World War II. After 6 years of war, the human toll is heavy, with at least 60 million dead, mostly civilians. Many cities are completely destroyed. Europe and the USSR subject millions of German prisoners of war to bonded labor, many of whom would die. Germany and Austria are carved up among the victors. The old guard of European powers are left exhausted and ruined by war. The United States and USSR emerge as the remaining global superpowers. Despite the role of the UN, which aims to maintain peace and international security, both sides would eventually engage in indirect confrontations around the world.